Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Ejaz Haider. In an opinion piece in the Hindu newspaper last Monday, former Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, an eminent economist, advised the BJP government to, and I quote, act quickly to restore consumption demand through fiscal policy measures since the impact of monetary policy seems muted, unquote. He warned the economy risks stagflation, a reference to high inflation combined with stagnant demand and high unemployment, if it fails to act. Other independent economists agree. While the Modi government has announced various sector-specific measures and a cut in corporate taxes, economists note it has not directly addressed the widespread weakness in consumption demand, the main economic driver in recent years. Meanwhile, up north in occupied and now annexed state of Jammu and Kashmir, the Kashmir Chamber of Commerce and Industry says economic losses have run well over $1 billion since India revoked the region's autonomy and statehood in August. KCCI says it will sue the government. The beleaguered Kashmiris, however, say suing the government will not work because they have no faith in the Indian courts. The Indian Supreme Court has already faced criticism over its Ayodhya verdict and for its lack of enthusiasm in taking up petitions challenging the revocation of Article 370. In Delhi, the prestigious Jawaharlal Nehru University is witnessing student protests. The government's decision to put down the protests through heavy police action is only worsening the situation. Known for its left-leaning tendencies, the JNU students say the right-wing government is punishing them for speaking out against the government. The central issue is the annual fee hike, and it affects more than just JNU. To discuss the situation in India under a government that was returned with a clear majority and improved on its last showing, we are joined by Siddharth Varadarajan, an eminent journalist, also the founding editor of the Wire.in. We shall also shortly be joined by Arun Kumar, who is an economist and joins us from Delhi, and Mr. Zaffar Qureshi, who is the chairman of Kashmir Campaign Global and lives in exile in London. Thank you to all the panelists. Siddharth, let me begin with you. Now, here's the thing. Modi had an image of someone who could deliver. Many people, as you remember, cited the success story of Gujarat. What has happened?
What's happened is that the image, which was carefully manufactured, I would say, through years of propaganda and friendly media and burnished by the support of the corporate sector, which had high hopes in Modi delivering a government that would open a path for the corporates to make enhanced profits. That myth of competence and that myth of efficiency has been busted. So when confronting the first real crisis on the economic front, incidentally a crisis that is of his own making, because the origins of the current slowdown really can be traced back to his decision, completely, a decision that drew on no research and drew on no analytical insights. The decision to demonetize roughly 85% of Indian currency notes in circulation, allegedly in order to fight black money. So that one decision of Mr. Modi back in 2016 has had a cascading impact such that even 3 years later, sectors which were affected then are now really beginning to go belly up. And even people in the automotive sector saying that the slowdown in car sales, etc., they're linking that to demonetization. So I think this is a crisis of his own making. And neither Mr. Modi nor his advisors, nor the set of bureaucrats that he has surrounded himself with are really, have a clue as to how to increase growth rates and get the economy back on track. I think what Dr. Manmohan Singh suggested is fairly sound advice, but precisely because it is sound advice and it comes from a political rival, Mr. Modi is most likely to disregard it.
Okay, Siddharth, I have several other questions with reference to your response, but let me first hop across to Zaffar in London. Mr. Qureshi, I just talked about in my opening with reference to what the KCCI says in relation to economic losses in Kashmir, and as I said, they said that they will sue the government, but I've been speaking with Kashmiris, and my sense is that most of them, and it's through bilateral exchanges also, and what I've seen on the social media also saying, we don't believe anything will come out of that because the Indian courts are not going to give any relief to Kashmir. Do you also share that sense?
Absolutely, we share the same sentiments. The Indian court system has proven over time and time again, rather than following the justice and the constitution, it is pretty much the strengths of the Indian court systems are pulled by the ruling party. I mean, we've seen the case of Abdul Guru previously, who was hanged to satisfy the social conscience rather than actually provide him with justice, even though he wasn't, he was not found guilty. We've also heard other court rulings which have never been in favor of the Kashmiris or in favor of the justice itself. Kashmiris at this moment have got a very low hope of the Indian justice system trying to provide rulings based on fairness and justice, but rather expect all the government, rulings to be in favor of the party. This has also been proven recently in case of the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya, where an unfair judgment was passed in favor of the Hindus, where no justice has been served, or we don't expect it to be served either.
Okay, back to Siddharth. Siddharth, I'm going to ask you about this Indian, so the criticism that the Indian Supreme Court has been facing with reference to the verdict. But before that, let me ask you something else. What we have witnessed from afar, especially in Pakistan, is an Indian government with a heavy RSS footprint, sponsoring a Hindutva ideology of exclusion and making belligerent noises against Pakistan. Now, it seems to sell, but how does that square with the development project?
Well, development is really emerging as one of the least priorities of this government, which is ironic because both in 2014 and then again in 2019, Mr. Modi made it a point to coin these slogans of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. This time he added the line Sabka Vishwas also. In their public rhetoric, development is important, and they pride themselves in being a government that is able to deliver, and they've cited various data and statistics. But a lot of truth to tell, in some areas there have been improvements, but by and large, as far as the overall performance of the macro economy is concerned, the fact is that tinkering with the base year and various other indices can provide an illusion that somehow growth rates are high, but everybody knows that the economy is growing at under 5%, and this is entirely a product of the fact that Mr. Modi and his colleagues appear to be pursuing other agendas on a top priority rather than the economic one. And it's really quite unfortunate that in a society like ours, where you have high unemployment, where you have poverty, and there's so many issues crying out to be solved, they would want to prioritize issues like temple or this rabbit hole of a national register of citizens or various other diversionary issues that really have nothing to do with the living conditions of ordinary Indians. And so I think I would say that, the way that I would theoretically analyze what's happening is that faced with their own failures and their own inadequacies on the economic front, Modi and his colleagues are essentially chucking at the public one diversionary or one divisive issue at a time, so that people don't focus on the government's failings as far as development are concerned.
Yeah, but Siddharth, this kind of strategy, and we've seen, as I mentioned, with reference to Pakistan, and it actually helped Mr. Modi in the run-up to the last elections. But, this is, you can go this far and no more. Now, there were promises about cleaning the Ganges and building smart cities, infrastructure development, jobs creation, growth boost, and the rest of it. But at some point, all of this will come back to bite the Modi government. And so he needs to, as former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said in the op-ed that I referred to, that the government needs to act fast. Siddharth?
No, without a doubt. I don't contest what you're saying. I don't contest what you're saying. But I would say that essentially the strategy appears to be to run a government on a wing and a prayer. You hope that maybe the international economic environment will improve. And but the fact is that by themselves, they are, every measure that they have taken has proved to be either counterproductive, as in the case of demonetization, or inadequate, as in the case of the recent step they took when they announced a significant cut in corporate taxes. Now, ordinarily, if you believe in supply-side economics, you would say, fine, a cut in corporate tax rates would give companies, it would leave them with more investable resources. Yeah. But companies also invest, you invest money when you sense that the overall economy is buoyant, right? So it's not enough for you to have more money in your pocket if you are not convinced that investing that money in greater productive capacity is going to lead to more sales and more profits. And I think right now, today, corporate India is a bit hesitant to invest, and the government, and this is precisely what Manmohan Singh was pointing to, the government needs to step in and ramp up its own expenditure and its own investment. But on that side, Mr. Modi is, the latest set of announcements were that he wants to sell off public sector undertakings, which if the past experience is anything to go by, you will raise and get some temporary respite on the fiscal front. But the fact is that these will be prime assets that will eventually fall into the hands of crony businessmen who are able to successfully bid for and get these assets without any great benefit accruing to the population or the people of India.
Absolutely. Stay with me, Siddharth. Let me go to Mr. Qureshi. Mr. Qureshi, given the situation in Kashmir, and it's more than 100 days now, what is the general sense? I mean, are the Kashmiris reconciled to what has happened, i.e. that the Modi government has given them a fait accompli, or is there some plan of action in terms of, a pushback?
To be honest, there's definitely a resentment and animosity within the Kashmiris. No, we will, even though the Indian media and the Indian government is trying to portray the Kashmir situation as normal or returning to normal by, creating a false narrative in the media, the Kashmiris are hell-bent at this point that everything that they've worked for has been snatched away from them. And we are looking for an opportunity to retaliate and make sure that we are not forced with all these decisions going across. The situation is getting worse every day. I was speaking to some of the friends yesterday in occupied Kashmir. Even though in the news it says 3 days of normalcy, there was still some curfew imposed. Hospitals have still been blocked. The shops have still been closed. There's an economical crisis happening, humanitarian and economical crisis happening in Kashmir. Trillions worth of dollars are in loss. How can we be satisfied? How can we expect Kashmiris, over 9 million Kashmiris that have been imprisoned and besieged in their own homes with no life at all, with no recourse to the basic rights, accept this kind of a situation, this kind of a treatment? This treatment is completely unacceptable on any standards, whether you talk about democracy, whether you talk about any other form of level. It is completely unacceptable. And we as the Kashmiris will stand up against this and definitely retaliate on this.
Okay, Mr. Qureshi. I'm also joined by Mr. Arun Kumar, who's an economist. Mr. Kumar, thank you for being on the program. Before you joined, I was speaking with Siddharth Varadarajan. He's also on the panel. We were talking about the state of the economy, and I actually began with a reference to the op-ed that former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh penned for The Hindu, in which he talked about the state of the economy and advised the government to act fast. And he also said that since the results of the monetary policy seem muted, the government has to take some fiscal policy measures. So give us a sense of how dire the situation is.
The situation is that the official rate of growth has been falling for the last 6 quarters. It has come down from 8.2% 6 quarters back to now about 5%. And it's expected to fall further to 4.5% or even less than that in the coming quarter. And because there's really no turnaround in the economy, the rate of growth is likely to fall further. Now, this is only the data from the organized sector, and the unorganized sector is not factored in. If you factor in the unorganized sector, then the economy would have a negative rate of growth rather than a positive rate of growth. So the economy has entered recession. And that's why the employment is a problem. That's why consumer confidence is a problem. Business confidence is also down according to RBI. the capacity utilization in the official organized sector is also declining according to RBI, and it's below the average of the last many quarters. So in other words, the economy is in a recessionary situation, which is a bad thing for the Indian economy.
Okay, so you think, Siddharth was saying that all these issues the Modi government has kind of brought onto them. He referred to the mismanaged demonetization and the rest of it. But it seems to me as a layperson that there might be other structural issues that have impacted the economy. Do you really think that the government is taking, because they are doing something sector-wise, but do you think this is enough to sort of, give a spur to the economy?
So you are right that the problem began with demonetization, which hurt the unorganized sector, and the unorganized sector is 45% of the output and 94% of the employment. Now, if such a large sector gets hurt, the incomes there decline, then the food demand also went down, and the farmers' incomes also declined, and they are roughly 50% of the workforce. So such a large workforce in crisis of loss of income, what you have is a demand slowdown in the economy. It first hit the unorganized sector, then it's hit the organized sector as well, because soon after, 8 months after demonetization, we had GST, which again hurt the unorganized sector. And then a year later, we had the crisis of the non-bank financial companies, which provide loans to this unorganized sector. So there have been 3 big shocks to the economy in the last 3 years, and that's why the problem has begun from the unorganized sector. Unfortunately, in the last 4 months after the budget in July, the government has been giving packages to the organized sector and the corporate sector, but that is not where the problem began. So the solution lies in boosting incomes in the unorganized sector, boosting incomes in the farming sector. If you're able to do that, then only will the demand revive, and then only capacity utilization will increase and investment will increase. Otherwise, investment is down, credit offtake is down, and those are all showing signs that the economy is in recession. So the government needs to really take care of the unorganized sector rather than the corporate sector and the organized sector, which is not going to lead to an increase in demand.
Okay. That was Mr. Arun Kumar, an economist speaking with us from Delhi. Thank you so much. Siddharth, moving away from the state of the economy in India, what exactly is the game plan in Kashmir? I mean, in the sense that how long can it be kept under the jackboot?
I think that having taken this step of reading down Article 370 and ending Jammu and Kashmir's statehood and essentially bifurcating it and converting it into 2 union territories, the ground has been prepared for a prolonged bout of rule directly from the center, from Delhi. Even though Mr. Modi has, in his first televised speech in August after this decision, had said that every effort would be made to hold elections quickly, I suspect it will be a while before they really have elections in place, because before they do that, they first have to decide what to do with all of the mainstream leaders who now are entering their 108th or 109th day of incarceration. These are leaders who had taken part in elections in the past before and had been elected, and their presence as elected leaders was in fact heralded around the world by Indian diplomats as proof that India respects the wishes and decisions of the people of Kashmir. So, I don't know how the government of India, how the Modi government plans to get its head around this contradiction, but eventually I think the plan is to try to have some semblance of electoral politics, either with or without parties like the National Conference and PDP, and to essentially hope that.
Do you think these parties will play ball? I mean, even their leaders have been incarcerated following the August 5th decision.
The irony is that we don't know what these parties really think, because, as you know, based on your own experience in Pakistan, it's the top leaders of these parties who call the shots, right? And with both the PDP and the National Conference top leadership out of action, we really don't know what these parties are thinking. But my sense is that it will become, the dilemma they will face if and when they are released and elections are called, that if you choose to boycott, then elections will go ahead anyway. And then, perhaps the BJP may win in the valley based on very low turnout and whatever it is, right? Which then gives a certain amount of legitimacy. So there are arguments to be made on both sides, whether to boycott, whether to take part. But I think
Siddharth, you know firsthand that PDP, which used to draw its electoral strength from South Kashmir, even before the August 5th decision, had begun to lose that support in South Kashmir. South Kashmir, which never really was into the kind of resistance that we saw in North Kashmir, became the hub of resistance against the Indian rule.
Yeah, see, South Kashmir, PDP, South Kashmir used to be PDP stronghold, and Mehbooba Mufti stood from Anantnag and she lost that seat. National Conference won it. But I would imagine that what August 5th has done is that all bets are off now, right? I mean, all equations have to be redrawn. Once the people of Kashmir have been through the experience of Schadenfreude, celebrating the misfortune of leaders whom they never respected perhaps in the past, the realization will dawn that, okay, now all earlier distinctions of mainstream and separatist, electoral and boycottists, those distinctions have kind of vanished, right? And people will have to think afresh about how they engage with elections, how they engage with politics. And
people will have to think afresh. But here, Siddharth, before I wrap up this segment, our mutual friend Ejaz Haider wrote in one of our articles in The Hindu saying the analogy was that the government is like someone who has a foot on the minefield. The foot can't stay on the minefield for very long, and if you lift it, then the mine is going to go off. So I guess that seems to be the dilemma right now. Thank you so much. That was Siddharth Varadarajan, and thank you also to Ms. Zaffar Qureshi for speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to discuss the indictment of Benjamin Netanyahu by the Israeli Attorney General and Netanyahu's refusal to resign and step down. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. As I said, before going to the break, we moved to Israel. Now, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Thursday he would not resign despite being charged with bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in a corruption scandal that he denounced as an attempted coup. The charges announced by Attorney General Avichai Mendelblit are the first of their kind against a serving Israeli Prime Minister and represent the worst crisis in the political career of Israel's longest-serving leader. Netanyahu, in power continuously since 2009 and before that in the 1990s, has dominated Israeli politics for a generation and has decisively turned the country to the right. While he's not legally obliged to resign, the indictment has emboldened his political rivals trying to dislodge him after two inconclusive elections since April. A third election is expected to be announced within weeks since both Netanyahu and Benny Gantz have failed to form a government. To discuss the political crisis in Israel, we are joined by Guy, who is a Middle East expert, joins us from Brussels. Thank you for being on the program, Guy. And Professor Kamel, Hawwash, who teaches at the University of Birmingham. Thank you to you also. And yes, we also have Leila Hatoum with us, who is a journalist and joins us from Dubai. Guy, let me begin with you. It seems to me that, there have been strikes against Iranian targets in Syria. Earlier, there was the assassination of an Islamic Jihad leader. Seems to me that in the middle of the crisis, Netanyahu is trying to sort of change the discourse. But is that going to actually help him with this?
From the Palestinian perspective, this is something that's sort of pretty much constant. It is not necessarily linked to the politics that's taking place within Jerusalem. Certainly, the Israeli media is reporting on this and has expressed some concern. The Jerusalem Post having sort of actually recommended that Benjamin Netanyahu stand down. And one of the reasons for that is its concern that it's going to be very difficult for him as prime minister to be carrying out government activity when, if for some reason he's also having to deal with Israel's challenges across the border, that his attention won't be totally focused on the job. Okay,
let me hop over to Professor Hawwash here. Professor, tell me, it seems to me, or at least I get a sense from afar that when I said trying to change the conversation, if there are going to be elections, it seems to me that he's also sort of signaling to the street and trying to get his ratings up in the next election. Do you think that sense is correct?
Netanyahu is definitely a political survivor who is a very skilled politician, working in what is a really complex political environment in Israel because of the electoral system itself. So he will use whatever is available to him in terms of normal electioneering, in terms of trying to entice particularly President Trump to give more gifts to Israel that he can claim he brokered, such as the recognition of the sovereignty of Israel over the Golan, Jerusalem move, etc. Also looks to the Israeli street and says, look, I am the person who has delivered all of these wins for Israel. I mean, certainly the wins that Israel has gained under Donald Trump, I don't think any political leader in Israel could have dreamed of achieving them all in the space of 3 years. So he's sort of, that's what he's playing on is, I am the person who is bringing all these wins to Israel. Israel is a stronger country, recognized as a major military power. And by the way, the Palestinians, nobody's talking about the Palestinians as far as he's concerned. So he's sort of delivering and looking to the Israelis saying, for goodness sake, can't you see that I am the best that you have?
Here's the problem. Trump himself is facing his own woes. So I don't know how that's going to unfold. But here's the thing, Leila. I was just, doing research. I was looking up the system and how this works. And it seems to me that the conviction on the charges could bring a lengthy jail sentence. But also that any trial could be delayed for months by this political crisis, and Netanyahu could try to secure parliamentary immunity from prosecution. So you think that he would be able to play this?
I highly doubt that he would be able to play this one with the immunity because it started way before the third election. That's one thing. So the charges have already been done and made. Even if he gains immunity for that, there will either be an impeachment or basically he will be convicted and put in jail after his term is done. We've seen that happen with the former president, if you remember, and with Olmert as well. But the idea is, as my colleague said, Netanyahu is a very smart person and he's trying to play it for his advantage. But he can fool some of the people all the time. He can fool all the people some of the time, but he can't fool all the Israelis all the time. So the elections are not going to be in his favor. It has been a dictatorship of Bibi Netanyahu all the way since 1997. He's always tried to stay in power and worm his way in by aligning with the smaller parties to gain a small majority to be a prime minister. He had never been like a prime minister with a vast majority, except for once, and that's it. With the third elections, I do expect that he's going to try to play on the sentiment that he had managed to broker some sort of agreements with the Arab world, that he had managed to bring Jerusalem to Israel. He had managed to legalize the settlement from the American eye or perspective. But at the same time, the Israelis are fed up with these matters. They want a strong leader, not a politician. So I think that they're leaning towards Gantz. We saw Gantz winning in the previous election, but there was some sort of a last-minute play at one point or another that helped Bibi Netanyahu breathe for some time. But this is not going to, this is going to stick on him this time. This is what I believe.
Okay. Guy Burton, when Netanyahu says this is an attempted coup against me, and he also said that the investigators were after me, what exactly does he mean by that?
He is a very clever individual. He is sort of exploiting every sort of opportunity and loophole that he can. He's effectively trying to say whatever it takes to remain in power. If that means sort of taking the country with him, so be it. In fact, that's one of the main criticisms that has been made by Benny Gantz. There's at least 3, charges that have been sort of indicted against Netanyahu, involving sort of being given gifts. But I think that particularly the most egregious one is that he has sort of made a deal with a media magnate to be able to sort of get favorable coverage in exchange for sort of business relations. I mean, this has been going on for a number of years. It's cost a lot of money, and there's a number of serious testimony that has been made. So it's quite significant that it has actually reached this point. I guess Netanyahu is perhaps sort of banking on the fact that his kind of almost firestorm will sort of sustain him and bolster him both within his political party as well as within the wider society. Certainly, there is already survey evidence that has been showing that there is increasing distrust by the Jewish population of Israel against the Arab population, less trust or less confidence and legitimacy of seeing the Arabs as members of Israeli society.
That was Guy Burton speaking with us. Let me go to Professor Hawwash here. Professor Hawwash, how is this going to play out? Let me give you a scenario. So he has already been charged. That means there's enough evidence for his indictment. Now, this will go to trial. How long could that take, going to the trial take? Then, parallel to that, of course, is the likelihood of Israel going to another round of election. Now, two things can happen. Either Gantz can win and form the government, in which case, what would be the fate of Netanyahu? The other possibility is Netanyahu winning. If that works out, then how does these charges hold?
Well, first of all, there's in the next, I think it's 23 days, members of the Knesset can, if you like, coalesce around one person who might be prime minister, who would if they come with the right number, 61 or more Knesset members, that would give that person the majority needed to govern. So I think that's the next thing that will play out is whether that is possible. But judging by what's happened when either Gantz or Netanyahu tried to form a government, I'm not sure they're going to find someone to coalesce around. It could be that the Likud itself decides, particularly with this indictment now, that it's time to find someone else that will lead the Likud and maybe then form a government. But during all of that time, the process, there's also the process of whether immunity would be withdrawn from Netanyahu, which will take, again, there are 30 days.
Professor, what's the process that? Immunity. Yeah.
I think the speaker, so the president, the attorney general has told the speaker of the Knesset that Netanyahu is being charged, and now it's for the Knesset to sort of withdraw that immunity for him to face the charges in that respect. Again. On the one hand,
is there a procedure, Professor, for that, or would that mean that Netanyahu can actually sort of lobby with the members of the Knesset and try and get them to not remove the immunity?
Well, I mean, again, it goes back to the different parties, and the Likud members are, of course, unlikely, even though these are serious charges. They're perhaps unlikely to say to the speaker, yes, we want to withdraw the immunity from you. So it then goes back to the numbers and whether there's a majority for the removal of that immunity. So I mean, these are the things that are playing out, while at the same time, a government may or may not be formed in the next month, and if we go to future elections, at the moment Netanyahu is saying he's not going to resign. So one would assume that he would say, "I'm the leader of the Likud, and I will be standing as for the post of prime minister in the next elections again if they happen."
I see. Leila, if Netanyahu were to be removed from the scene, who's likely to replace him as the leader of the Likud?
Well, the thing is, I don't think it will be Likud at any point because he was their main man. Everybody under him is too small to fight for that seat. My opinion, it would be the next person in the elections. But I just wanted to point out one thing, that Netanyahu currently has 30 days to request the Knesset to grant him immunity. So at the moment, basically, because the first elections happened earlier this year, the new House committee has no. The Knesset has no committee that has been appointed so far. The Labour Party, we saw it yesterday, asking the Knesset to form a parliamentary committee to follow up on the charges against Netanyahu. And as I said, I don't think it's going to stick on him, and I don't think he's going to be granted immunity for that matter.
Okay, on a slightly lighter note, I ask you, if you were doing a tarot pack thing on Netanyahu's future, how do you think that's going to work out?
If he fails to gather allies within the smaller right-wing parties, I see him next to almost in prison.
Okay, so he's going to be in prison. Would that make any difference? So just changing the conversation a little, would that make any difference with reference to the Palestinians? Or we are now looking at an Israel that Netanyahu has moved so far to the right that nothing really positive is going to come out of his being away from the scene?
It wouldn't change at all. I mean, nothing would change in Israel until we see the results of the U.S. elections that are happening next year. That's one thing. It depends on who is coming to be president in the U.S. That's one thing. The other thing is that the Israeli policy has been the same under any party, irrespective. They might have been more lenient or less lenient over the past 30 years, but they all had the same goal. Get more land, sack the Palestinians, don't give them rights. Everybody in the Israeli political parties agree on that, irrespective if it's right-wing or left-wing. I mean, the left-wing is more lenient, but they all look towards having basically the state as their own. A two-state solution was a dream at one point or another, but after the Americans legalized the settlements in the West Bank, I highly doubt that we're going to see it anytime soon.
Okay, thank you. That was Leila Hatoum speaking with us. Let me go back to Guy Burton. Leila said that the Palestinian issue is going to largely depend on who wins the next U.S. elections. Do you think that is the correct way to analyze this? I mean, how far, assuming that a Democrat president assumes office, how much difference could that be to the real sort of structural and issues of realpolitik and the U.S. support for Israel, et cetera, et cetera?
I think there's broader structural considerations here, which is that, just as on the Israeli side, there is a broad consensus which is in favor of, gaining more land and not giving up the West Bank and remaining in control, to lean towards the Israelis more than the Palestinians. And I think that's pretty much consistent, maybe with a few exceptions on the Democrat side that may be changing. But broadly, the American position has generally tended to be closer to the Palestinians. So for the Palestinians, they have started to look at alternatives. From the elite level, at least, sort of the leadership, they've tried to internationalize their response. By trying to gain, admission and acceptance as a state with, to things like the International Criminal Court and the United Nations, with the aim that will get other countries to support them. And then there is also a response within society, which is the boycott, divestments and sanctions movement, which is trying to build transnational links with civil societies and other countries to put pressure on Israel, to respond, to react, and to actually engage in negotiations with the Palestinians. Okay.
Professor Hawwash, we see this sort of rising tide of jingoism, ultra-nationalism, not just in Israel, but in many parts of the world. And as we said, Netanyahu, over an entire generation, has been able to move Israel to the right. Do you think that this is a process which is reversible? And if it's not reversible, how would this impact any kind of settlement, if at all, with the Palestinians? I mean, Guy has talked about the Palestinians internationalizing it. I don't know how far is that going to work. But what is your take on this?
Well, first of all, in terms of whether Israeli society is likely to lurch back, if you like, to the center or to the left, I'm not optimistic about that, because they see all the gains that have come their way. include, they can go and live cheaply in the settlements. They can travel the world without any problem. Settlers who are living in illegal settlements can fly into the UK without any problem, etc. So they don't see an impact of the occupation on their daily lives. And Israel's economy hasn't suffered as a result of the fact that it is practicing.
So unless the cost is raised for Israel and for the settlers,
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
And the question is, how would the cost be raised? If an American president came in who said, yes, there is a huge aid package that we have given Israel, but now it's going to be predicated on an end to the settlement activity, et cetera, that would have an impact. But it doesn't look as if that's going to happen. Will an American president move the American embassy back to Tel Aviv? I don't think so. The question of the settlements is different because some of the Democrat nominees have acknowledged that the settlements are illegal straight after that decision by Pompeo or the announcement. I think for the Palestinians, though, they've now lost, if you like, almost the Arab governments that used to support them. So they're struggling locally, even in their region, in gathering support. And they're forced to go and ask for funding from the Arab world because, for example, the Americans have stopped funding to UNRWA, and other countries are looking carefully at how the Palestinians spend their money. So it is time for the Palestinians to rethink their strategy.
So essentially, the cost has increased for the Palestinians, and there's no real cost for Israel for its policies. I'm sorry, I've run out of time. Thank you so much to Professor Kamel, Hawwash, and to Guy Burton. This is all for this week from Indus Special. We shall see you next week at the same time. Meanwhile, for latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.